My screen and kind of get into it today. I'm going to be showing a lot of new work that I made during the period I was in residency at PPAC, and sort of a combination of some other projects in the past. All right, we all see that? All good? Okay, perfect. So I wanted to start off today. I was thinking about like the thing that I do, like that brings me here, and sort of like this idea of like professing or being a professor, or being an educator, just in like general sort of like premise, right? And I was thinking about sort of where I teach at. So I teach in Farmville, Virginia, and I was thinking about when I do this act of being like a professor, educator, teacher, often, right? Because we're all on the screen, we really don't know what the surroundings look like, right? So when I think about like the landscape of the places that I talk about the things that I'm going to talk about today, or just in general, I think of the landscape of where I'm in. So I wanted to start off with this picture because it's also a part of sort of my ongoing project right now, which is called Exodus Home, which looks at the Great Migration. So this period that African Americans are fleeing the South due to violent persecution, and entering into sort of these urban spaces. And as I'm doing that work, I'm thinking about how in current times those urban spaces, right, are sites of mass violence against Black people, right? And so how this cycle of violence occurs, and where is it that one finds home at, right? And so that's sort of the ideas and thoughts that I'm thinking about in connection with this landscape and this place that I live. But just to kind of take a step backwards, right? I was kind of thinking about this word profess, right? And I was like, I did this a while ago because I was like, what do I actually do? I was going through this like existential crisis of being an educator, which I think is healthy and often the thing that happens. And I was like, what does it mean to profess? I thought it was really interesting. And when I read this, I kind of looked at number 2 as one that kind of stuck out to me, was to declare or admit openly or freely, and to declare in words or appearance only, to pretend or claim. And I thought that was really interesting because we think of a professor as speaking something that is knowledge and true, but like the root word of it is also this fallacy or this appearance of a thing, which really sort of connects, I think, to being an artist and an educator. Right? Because as an artist, I think we're very used to creating things for appearance, right, that may not exist yet out into the world, right? And so as I'm going through this presentation, I kind of bounce between things that I know are true, and then these other things which I'm formulating ideas about that may not necessarily exist, but are helpful for me to understand the things that I go through in life and the things that I see, right? And so when I think about professing or talking about the things that I know, which I think is sort of the root of this word, I think about, and I'm thinking about, again, this whole project of like Exodus Home, right? So I started to think about the things that I wish I had known when I left home, right? Are things I had used to, which I had known when I was a young child. And so when I was at the residency at PPAC, I started making this book called Things I Thought Would Be Self-Evident, or Things I Had to Learn When I Left Home. And I'm not really sure where it fits yet in sort of the whole spectrum of my practice or like this project, but I thought it would be great to start this talking very personally and then start to work our way out to sort of a global look at some issues and some thought processes. So the things I thought would be self-evident are the things I had to learn when I left home. The first of these things was there was a home and family across the ocean, and that there are things don't become more absolute and clear with time. And when I thought about putting these things together, I thought it was interesting as sort of like this kind of joke that I'm not really sure anyone else is going to really get, but because I'm here talking, you get kind of cued into the joke. So I think when you look at this work, you assume that what I'm talking about is across this ocean is Africa, a place that my ancestors would have come from. And so that I have some form of connection to that place, even though it may be distant or not personal, right? And it's based off of this perception that gets put on me about my experiences, right? So what's funny is that the image is taken in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where my family lived for a couple of years. And I always think back to this moment as like informative about like thinking about home and where one belongs. Because I was born in Chicago, and then we would go to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where my father had a teaching assistantship. And on our way back, going back to the States, we're on the plane. And so I was really young, so I had relearned, or I had learned Kiswahili, and I had totally forgotten English. And so, but I had a perception of English. So we're on the plane, and the flight attendant is going by, and she's talking to me, and she's being generally very friendly. And I asked my parents in Kiswahili, why doesn't this woman speak English, and why doesn't she mind her business? I was a little spunky kid, but the thought of it though, was this idea that like my perception of home has always been somewhat in a flux of what people may perceive that to be, right? And so I think through that, I started to understand that things don't become absolutely clear with time. How my personality or who I am fluctuates and is not always clear, just like so many other people. And through this, I started to also think about hypervisibility. There's no need to hide. You know, I think I spent a long time coming up as this person that is before you, feeling the necessity to be timid or not forthright about the things that I think about. And that's a fallacy that sort of gets put into me, that I shouldn't be that forceful, right? Especially with understanding of how hypervisual I am as a person, right? I walk into a room and there's already a perception of who I am and what I know and what I'm about. And so with that hypervisibility, I should just go ahead and own the things that I believe in and want to talk about. And so through that sort of exhorting sort of this presence, I realized that I have to flex on people sometimes so they don't forget who I am, right? That I come with a set of knowledge, I come with a set of beliefs, that my presence within a space is valid, you know, and that I can be there in my own right and show my strength and show my joy and show my vulnerabilities and show all of those things, right? And as I'm doing that, and I'm thinking about that, I look to history to understand what that action means and how that action can have different connotations at different periods of time. And so these are, I'll be showing some of these throughout sort of the presentation, and they're kind of like these markers. And they're about the Red Summers, what I'm kind of calling the Red Summers. The one that people really kind of associate with Red Summer happened in 1919 across the United States. This image is from Chicago. There were a series of race riots which occurred as soldiers are coming back from World War I, right? African-American soldiers, and they're coming home with this new sense of independence and freedom and strength and power that they want to show, right? And this fills the communities that they're going back into with fear. And so what we see, and I think about these Red Summers, are there these moments where, you know, physical or theoretical positions of Blackness become unchecked and they become to grow and swell. And so as a balancing of a scale of white supremacy, the state or its vigilantes try to suppress this action. And this can happen in these like really big ways, like race riots or political movements or storming of Capitol buildings, but they also happen in much more mundane spaces, right? And so when I looked at those images from the Red Summer of 1919, I thought of this picture. Because essentially what I noticed was if I took away everything, it was some actors on some said street and there was a tension amongst them. And I felt that tension in these like super mundane ways, right? Where you can find yourself on any street corner minding your business and look up and find yourself within a position of confliction with sort of these histories of oppression, our current feelings of oppression. And so these kind of moments occur with interactions with people, but they also can be about the interactions that occur between sort of the physical manifestations of, or cultural manifestations of Blackness as well, right? And I think about this sort of fetishization of Blackness, which is often equally, well, I guess always equally met with a level of persecution or violence against it, right? So where people will love, Black music, but don't necessarily care for Black people, right? And in these sort of both like symbolically violent and physically violent spaces, we find that Black people find ways of creating space for themselves, right? And just a real quick side little note, I'm going to talk a lot about Blackness, but the state of Blackness is worldwide, all right? In any place that you go, you will often find a certain people who are oppressed, right? And so when I say Blackness, just go ahead. If you feel something similar that's occurring to you, you can just replace the word with your own demarcation. Right? But also, so thinking about these spaces, right? As I'm going around Virginia, photographing all these old houses and industrial spaces, which would have been occupied during or after the Great Migration, right? And so these old structures of those times that are gone by. And so often I'm staring at these structures and seeing how their fallacies are kind of bringing them to crumble down, right? Like all the things of the past are kind of imploding into these spaces. And so I'm trying to always like figure out where I intersect myself in there. Do I try to like prepare this house or will I crumble inside of it? Or do I find a space or a place to operate outside of that crumbling structure? And this is mimicked, right, in a lot of ways by the realities and experiences of being Black, where you find that you must force yourself into a position where you demand that space. And when you do that, you'll find yourself surrounded by sort of the goons of colonialism. That's what I always think when I see this picture, right? And this is from the, boycotts of the 1960s to desegregate dining, segregation in all facets. Right, so you find yourself surrounded by this whiteness that's kind of pushing you into a space of your own. And you find yourself orbiting outside of this sort of mass amount of space that whiteness will take up, right? Especially, I'm thinking about in the United States, but I think that these things also exist more globally, right? And you have to stay on the margins of their existence, right? And your life becomes this thing that they can impede on or trample on with little concern. And this space, right, can be the distance between me and you, right, between a rock and a hard place, between a building and myself. But it is really just about the space, about the room left to occupy out of the solid things which fail or refuse to move out of the way. We are the Black matter that surrounds us, the space that are more livable, more comfortable, and filled with ease. So I started thinking about space, right? And I was like space is actually Black, right? Like it's Black. So that I was like, blank one, like it kind of fit this idea of how I was thinking about space and like a physical thing that we sort of occupy. But if the structures of white supremacy and colonialism make the earth less inhabitable for us, right? You can think of this as an array of ways from like global warming, right? Or like global anti-Black sentiments. And people are talking about inhabiting space. I kind of feel like we have to think about space as being a place which includes Blackness. And I go to, the more blurry picture I thought. We go to Octavia Butler, right? I think she's had a surge right now in the readership based off of sort of how our reality is becoming more dystopic, I think, every day, right? But I think that she has this idea of inserting narratives of Blackness that go into the future, right? And go into space and have this other ability to leave the fallacies or the crumbling structures that are here and go to a different space, right? And so when I'm thinking about these things, just to be clear, I kind of am talking literal, but I'm also talking a little bit metaphorical of what space can mean. And so just also to be clear, when I'm talking about like space, I'm not talking about the creation of replications of what is on Earth in like a different space, right? I'm talking about needing to build or create something that is totally outside of that spectrum, right? And I saw this meme, I think it was like last night, and it was about this first hotel being operational by 2027. And someone posts, you know, we really just want healthcare here, right? And so when I think about replications of systems, I don't want the replication of the systems that are on Earth currently somewhere else in this new space that I'm thinking of. Which brings me to this video that kind of brings me a lot of joy in sort of like conceptualizing what I'm talking about.
Earth is ghetto, I wanna leave, can you beam me up? I'm out on the street by the corner store, you know, the one on 15. Got a bright shirt on, so I'm easy to see. I've been down here stranded indefinitely. I can't reach my planet, but I need to leave. You should see these people, it's hard to believe how they treat each other. It's hard to conceive. Oh, Earth is ghetto, I wanna leave. Oh.
And I see this, man, when I find videos like this, it seems so serendipitous because I'm thinking about the same exact things, right? And I feel like there's this manifestation of viewing and thinking about Blackness, which is also sort of encapsulated in a lot of different facets of our sort of society when we're thinking about it. So if I'm not talking about these structures which come from Earth, what am I talking about, right? And so for me, what I'm talking about are the things which come from the Blackness of space, right? From the abyss that we don't really have the words or the structures for. I'm talking about something foreign and alien to the systems that we know, right? And so I started thinking, Black people are like aliens, and Black people are in our current culture, like so similar in thought process, in ideology, right? So like think about it, right? What is like our conception of aliens are they're brilliant and smart, right? They're far advanced in thinking than we are, right? And this is sort of a white-centric sort of ideology that I'm talking about here. A lot of these clips are coming from Hollywood films, right? So they're super smart, technologically advanced, right? They're very dangerous. There's a fear of them. They speak a dialect that we don't understand. And another important part, which is very strange, is they have like a proclivity to loving white women, which is another fear of sort of white-centric and white supremacy, right? Or if they're not like super violent and dangerous, they're magical, right? And they like help this character, or this usually a white man or, you know, white person, and they show them the magic of space, and they teach them and they give them everything with very little in return, normally just to spend their time like pandering to the ignorance of this person while they have this infinite level of knowledge, right? And so when I start to think about aliens as an idea, I'm like, there's probably a little bit more closeness between me and aliens in the ways in which we would operate and think, right? Which leads me to this other video that I found, which was like another sort of affirmation for me. Let's see if I can load this up.
Okay, bitch, I'm outside of some movie. Blue cheese, I swear I'm addicted to blue cheese. I gotta stick to this table like blue sleep. Bitch, I'm on my chicken like it's a two-piece. You can have your bitch back, she a groupie. She just swallow all my kids in a two-seat. Swagged out, familiar, we bringing them gas out.
Right, and so I was like, man, like aliens, like if they came and they come here, they're going to be like into culturally, socially, all these things that I understand and cue into as well. Let me get this back up. Right, and so outside of that, right, I had just found this clip, and I just thought it was this one statement that they not coming. They saw the season premiere of these United States and canceled the visit. Like, oh, that's really ghetto, right? And then I just think back to like that the Earth is Ghetto video, and like inside my head, there's just like this perfect loop of I don't know, the current thought process of intergalactic Blackness. And there's like this sub conversation that's happening out here that's like kind of in plain sight, but we all sort of know. And I really get a lot of kicks out of that. So I come back to this this exertion that Ashley B. Wormsley makes. There are Black people in the future, right? And so in my thought process, as I'm thinking about this, I come to this thought in a lot of different ways, right? I come to it in this sort of like Afrofuturistic, I think, notion that I'm sort of describing to you, but also I come with it in like the method that I do my work, right? And so I'm using historical documents, historical references to talk about the present and the future, which I kind of see in and of itself like futuristic work, right? Because I'm using the past to talk about the present and the future. And so using sort of the communication, the things left behind by ancestors and by people past for the benefit of today, right? What is time travel anyway? And so I think of it both in like this futuristic romantic way, but then also just tangibly on how I operate and work. So I began to make these collages, which kind of differed a little bit from, I guess it doesn't really. Well, I guess in the sense of like adding in sort of this like, this sort of more like space travel as an exodus, like, right, as a route. And I sort of started to add that into the collages that I was making, right? And so in these collages, you can see I'm like taking postcards. I go to like thrift stores a lot and I collect postcards, right? And postcards and memorabilia, because I think of them as also time travelers that gone through time to end up in sort of this artwork that I'm cutting up and using the originals for. And so I'm cutting these all up and putting them together with also found imagery and trying to create these sort of, not straight narratives, but sort of these spaces to sit and contemplate and think about space and place and sort of the social structures that we have, right? And so this idea, you know, of like global warming, right? And the steam coming up and like steam becomes sort of the expulsion of this rocket. And then next to the rocket is Marcus Garvey, right? If you don't know, Marcus Garvey was a part of the Back to Africa sort of movement and had, you know, could do a whole story or talk just about Marcus Garvey, right? But that idea of like exodus and movement became important in different facets to include. So the way that I kind of think of this work is, right, it's like bringing together these like spatial and like time, temporal sort of fluxes and like identity and moments in time and kind of compressing them together to see how they're all sort of interrelated in these often very ridiculous fashions, but can start to like make us really kind of key in, I hope, to some of these ideas. So like, for example, in this piece, I'm really thinking about whiteness and beauty in the way that is idealized, right, in the white female form. So I have this picture that comes from the cover of the American Beauty movie, right? And so in it, I'm adding in all these other sort of visuals. One of them is this gold dust twins. I'm kind of like fascinated with these advertisements because I think it's interesting that Blackness is like thought of as like a brand of soap and they clean up the messes of whiteness, which I think is like a perfect analogy for, you know, often what is called upon by Black people within our current systems. And so in it, right, we have these twins who are sort of operating counter to the ways in which we kind of think that they should. And I'll talk a little bit more about this sort of usage of them in a second. But in this, right, I'm using sort of like this cold train, right, like as a stand-in for, Black follicles, Black dick, basically, right? And it's like going into the American Beauty stomach, right? And then behind it is this poster from World War I, where, the US forces used this ape to sort of demean their enemies, right? And a part of it they build into it is this fear that this ape with this brutal force and this military knowledge is going to somehow or another defile the purity of the white woman. And then you have these like gold dust twins up there here, and they're up to mischief, right? They're farting, shitting out like astronauts, right? They're cleaning off the knob. But then also on the right, they're like talking about what they're trying to go out there and get, right? Kind of referencing back to this poster, like, I'm scouring the earth for my affinity. Are you interested? And that affinity is like white women. And so you have this character and he's like hanging himself and he's like, I can't even take this. This is like the biggest fear that I would possibly have. So I start to in my head, like put up these narratives that are occurring through time with all of these different figures. Right, and this stuff is like a part of our normal lexicon, right? I mean, we can just go back to this poster and the photograph that Annie Leibovitz takes of like LeBron James, where they talk about a lot of how the body gesture and the figures sort of mimic this war sort of poster, right? And it sort of then just kind of fuels this sort of fear of the Black form, right? And this like misogynation that occurs, which I always thought was weird. Like I've always thought that like that fear was weird, obviously, but like part of it also comes from like how comfortable like white ideology is okay with like white men and Black women through time. That has been a very fraught relationship, especially if you think about enslavement. Well, I guess I'm talking particularly about enslavement, right? In the times after, or just in general, where sexual assault against Black women was normalized during enslavement, right, as a thing that could happen. And so this kind of like fear of crossing the line is also like the subtext of how white men operate. But also this like general idea of like the court case or the thing that becomes cemented for this ideology is like a white man and a Black woman. I think is quite interesting in what is normalized as a possible or okay sort of mixing of the races and how there's like these contradictions in it. And so I go back, right, think about this image, and about how they want the perception of the strong Black character to be as this like ape, right? But it doesn't really fit when I start going through the history books and looking at the contributions of Black people to this country, right? So we think of Rosie the Riveter as the white woman with her arm up, right? But there's all these other images out here of other Rosies, which gave something for the hope that when they returned back home, when soldiers returned back home, that there would be something better, right? They were riveting for a better future. So we come sort of to another one of those sections, like a milestone in like history or time. Moving a little bit forward, this is a portrait of Isaac Woodard Jr. He was a decorated African-American World War II veteran. And in 1946, he's honorably discharged from the United States Army on February 12th. While still in his uniform, he was taking a bus headed back home, and he was attacked by the police and was brutally beat. And this moment is sort of considered one of the beginning moments of the civil rights movement, right? And in a lot of these pictures, I started to like cover up the faces of Black people with the gold. A lot of the times in situations of violence being put upon the person in varying degrees. And I think that I like that idea of like masking the face, because I think when you look at When you look at the faces, a lot of people feel like they can't understand the humanity of Black people as is, and so they can't really understand the things that they're looking at. So they don't need to see them anymore. We can only just really describe the situation, and if that's not enough, you don't need to like fetishize my pain or others' pains, right? I'm gonna make them something different. Then also it's just like, these people are golden. They're like a part of a canon of people who sacrificed, right? And so it's a way to like exalt their memory and their name. But I kind of wish, I guess I don't wish, I kind of think, maybe not directly, but a little bit as I travel and take these photographs, I can maybe understand a little bit of what Isaac Woodard, you know, came home to. Because he came home to a system, a structure that looked probably old and foreign to him. It looked like being dilapidated, that it was falling apart. And he could see that in his own desires to exert his place in the world in a way different than maybe was conceived before he had left to fight in World War II. And so under this mindset, I explore these spaces, trying to figure out what it means to try and inhabit these spaces of falling systems. You know, I really try to like make myself at home, to feel like what it's like to live within them, to have been there, to think about the memories and the people who possibly could have lived within these spaces. And some of them, you know, are very mundane to me. Like I said, like this one is taken in the back of my house. You know, like you can drive back like a couple of minutes and you'll find an old shack that was used for indentured servants when the property I used for it was a tobacco plantation, right? I lived in what was considered during that time the big house, which is in and of itself a lot of weird stories for sure. I come back to suitcases a lot. I found a suitcase in one of the places that I was photographing. I like using it because it kind of makes me feel like I'm like unpacking or packing away these like things that have been used generation after generation for like nation building or like maybe surviving the current nation. And I put all these like different objects that I'm thinking about, right? Put like a hammer because I'm always thinking about like building, right? I think about money a lot, root of all evil, right? And so it has that Confederate stamp on it, right? Thinking about how, you know, money is a tool of white supremacy. Think about Martin Luther King, right? The ideas of nonviolence, of love, but then also the gun, right? To think about sort of by the total opposite sort of response to oppression. And I think those two things are really important because I think a lot of conversation is had about what is like appropriate responses to oppression by Black people. I think we get a lot of that right now coming up where, you know, it's like, what is the appropriate response? Is it protest, right? Is it rioting? Is it conversation? And I think it's kind of interesting, especially in light of everything that just happened with the riots at the state capitol. And we see that nothing in the same way happened to those rioters, right? On like the seat of government. And so when I come back to this image, I think now thinking about the things I pack and what should or shouldn't be used, I feel freed in a way of having to like really justify any motion, because I know that no matter what motion I make, violence is often put upon me, right? And so whether it be peaceful, right? You can think back to the civil rights movement, they were met with violence. You can think to the Black Panthers, right? And more radical forms of Black nationalism, right? Violence was brought upon them. You can think about churches, right? And desire and belief in God. even violence is brought upon them. And so in that, I kind of stopped really making a forthright effort in distinguishing between any of those type of things, and realizing and letting myself relax in knowing that, you know, any response to oppression is a horrendous state to have to be in, and to have to manifest a concrete plan forward. If you're in it with me, you know exactly the complexities that I'm talking about. And if you don't, maybe another moment to consider why not. Sidebar, back to suitcases. I love suitcases because they, right? I mean, I guess it's almost symbolic because suitcases bring me to start unpacking things. So this is another piece that I made while at PPAC. It's the one behind me, artfully put in the background. And so I'm thinking in this, again, about moving and motion and home and unpacking, right? And I'm back home. I haven't lived in Philly, well, for, man, like 7 or 8 years. It's been a while, right? But it's interesting, I grew up on Osage, which becomes a little, so for you who maybe don't know some Philadelphia history, all right? In 1985, there's this organization called MOVE, which has been having a contentious relationship with the local government. And MOVE is sort of this pro-Black, right? And I guess, yeah, pro-Black sort of organization that's kind of, if I just summarize, because otherwise I'll be here a while, they are didactically different in cultural and social ideas of how they want to manifest themselves. And they have taken up space, right, a home, and declare that that home will be the space in which they enact their desires and their thoughts, right? And so I'm interested in that because in May 13th, right, 1985, right, the Philadelphia Police Department drops a bomb on the house, right, killing most of the people inside. And you see, right, like one of those moments where it's like, it doesn't matter what you do, there's a level of violence which can be put upon your body. And so in this, I'm using archival images of MOVE, but then also adding in images that I find and postcards that I find that sort of point to other motions and other movements that occur, right? Like horse and buggy, right? In Florida, sharecroppers going to church on a Sunday afternoon, like the 1930s, 1940s. I got like grand reunion and rally for the Negro people of the world, right? And this is for the votes for Marcus Garvey. And so all these other moments that occur in time where we're moving and we're making motion are followed in this legacy of what happens to MOVE, right? Where there's a level of persecution against you by all different sides, really, in this really complex way that happens over time, right? So now, I think, you know, as we think about that moment around MOVE, around all that kind of time period, I can think of, I was just looking, like a lot of people recently, at Judas and the Black Messiah, right? And they sort of talk about this guy right here, William O'Neill, in there. And, you know, that film really made me think a lot about sort of these different levels of like participation or holding up stakes in issues of oppression and violence and freedom for Black people, right? And it made me think of, I don't know if I thought of this, but kind of like I was spelling out allies and I realized there's a lie in every ally. And how there was this idea, and I'm looking at this image of Tommie Smith and John Carlos in the Olympics, 1968 Olympics, giving the Black Power fist, right? And they're all wearing the Olympic Project for Human Rights badges. And Peter Norman, who was the silver medalist in the 200-meter race, he wears a badge as well in solidarity with them. I think that the picture is like this striking like difference of participation in like the struggle, right? Where Tommy Smith and John Carlos are putting up their fist, and it's sort of like this action, like literal physical action and exertion of force, where Peter sort of allies and wears the badge, but is not really willing to go all the way with them. And I thought that was like, man. And so then I put it next to this picture of William O'Neill. And so if you don't know, William O'Neill was part of the Black Panther Party, and he helped in the planning of the assassination of Fred Hampton. And so like Peter Norman and like William O'Neill are kind of having like this side eye where they're kind of like, they both know a little bit of where they stand. But then I also think like the story of William O'Neill is really interesting because, you know, he does this interview for PBS, for Eyes on the Prize, right? To talk about his involvement in the assassination of Fred Hampton. And once he gets that story out, right? A lot of people didn't know that's what he did. He commits suicide. And I constantly have been going back to that, like, not really sure what to do with it, but like today, I sort of felt like it's sort of like this sign that like you can't play the fence on both sides forever. Like doing that will eventually fill you and rid you with guilt and maybe eventually kill you. And like, I don't like to sound didactic, but I think in these times, there is a little bit of a didacticness to either you're for freedom or you're not. Either you're going to act and actually act, or you're going to stand on the sidelines, right? But eventually a decision has to get made. Another marker, Fred Hampton being carried out of his home after the assassination in Chicago. And it's like really interesting sort of going back through time and looking at images like this, seeing the smile and happiness on the face of the police, and like the sadness that I get knowing that Fred Hampton is who they're carrying. Because like people like, you know, Fred Hampton, Angela Davis, George Jackson, these were like household names to me, right? They were like the people to look up to and really like exert to be like, right? But what you find is that we're very much a nation divided, right? And like I said before, there's certain spaces that we can occupy, usually right in like the side shadows of the box is where we're allowed to live. And through that division, we grow up very much with different heroes. You know, I think, you know, some people can be very liberal and progressive and they still like George Washington. Like they still believe that the founding of this nation, its principles were freedom and justice, like totally able to just look over genocide of indigenous people, that George Washington was a slave owner, like totally able to push that aside and say, no, but at the heart of George Washington was a good person, right? And so comes these contradictions, and these are taught to, you know, young kids like this, right? These are the histories and the narratives that they're told. And we learn different ones. You know, growing up, I learned Malcolm X, right? Standing by the window, waiting for someone to come for him. Like those are the different messages that we get. Some get the message that they can live in fallacy and contradiction, and others learn how to prepare for a life at the window, looking out. So I find ourselves, right? We're all traveling down this road together. We're living in the same landscape, but see that landscape in a totally different way, right? See the things that come into that space, see it in a totally different way. And I see it in a totally different way as well. I engage with things that are meant to mean one thing, and I see another message written in the undercurrent if I just look at it at the right angle. So I'll wrap up in a second here. I just got one more point and then I'm done professing, all right? So I thought about, right, as I'm thinking about navigating this like separation, I think of apartheid, right? Think of apartheid, South Africa, think of Sun City, right? Sun City is during apartheid South Africa, during some of its worst periods, there were these places called Bantustans, and they were sections that were legally unsegregated. And within these spaces, there was Sun City, which was this famous casino, and like not casino, but I think casino, music and everything. And there was no rules of segregation within these spaces, right? And I thought it was really weird that it was like the one section that's like unsegregated also is the section to get like entertainment from. And so why there's like this physical barrier, there's also like this musical thing and this cultural thing, which like supersedes and can cut through that in this weird way, right? And I started thinking about music and like, I guess this ability of Blackness to maybe not even be like a physical space or thing, but like this kind of like spirit or metaphysical force, right? And I was like, is that kind of true? Can I even find hints of that in history, right? Like, you can tell I kind of moved back and forth between those spaces. And so I made this piece looking at this image of Henrietta Lacks, right? And so Henrietta Lacks, 1951, young mother comes into her gynecologist and discovers a large malignant tumor on her cervix, right? And they do a biopsy, and while the doctor is studying her genes, finds that Henrietta Lacks' genes are like no genes he had ever seen before. Where other genes died within 24 hours, her genes doubled every 24 hours, right? And this ability, like discovering this, gave them the ability to use her genes to test medicine. And these genes are still used today. So the polio vaccine was in part used with Henrietta Lacks' genes, right, to test it. And so I started to think, I was like, okay, well, maybe it's possible then that everyone got a little Henrietta Lacks in her, right? And so that Blackness infuses into the physical body of a person, regardless of their orientation or thought process, right? All right. So, okay, so then during all this, like I said, I'm traveling around, I'm looking at all these old posters, I go in places, and we kind of come back now to the Gold Dust Twins, and why they're in so much of the work. As I thought about this, like this sort of thought process about Henrietta Lacks, and I said, okay, if there's a racist cartoonist out there drawing pictures and depictions of Blackness, is the infusion of Henrietta Lacks within their DNA allowing something to rest within the images that they create, which is essentially used or can be used for pro-Blackness, right? Is there like an undercurrent under them? And so I started to look at these images and think about the context, right? The context of the images is what makes them negative. If I understand Blackness and the act of being a laborer at home as a negative and bad thing, I will see a negative connotation to these. If I believe in the sort of patriarchal, heteronormative hypermasculinity that is white supremacy and its ideologies, I'll be offended that they're wearing anything that looks like a skirt, right? But if I take a step back and start to recontextualize and understand these figures, to in effect put them into a Black space, I can begin to decipher a different meaning, right? Because when I look at the Gold Dust Twins, I don't see someone doing demeaning work, right? I see someone doing a labor of love to try and support their families so that they may eventually get to a better position or to get the things that they want them to have, right? So I see my ancestors, I see my people in the figures of labor, right? And so I began to start to formulate all of these things together, the travel to space, the laboring of land, right? There's a cotton field in the back. Thinking about even like very tangible thoughts of space, right? So Melville Roy, 1960s, right? Leads the human computers to track NASA Echo satellites. And I start to see these figures and these forces as not these docile, not these like little figures that are are subhuman. No, I see these like figures that are activated, that they're just like sitting there waiting for the moment to strike. And I start to see in them things that I see in myself and I see in my friends, right? It's like, yo, listen, like we're all gonna live here, but when the time comes and things are gonna get crazy, I'm gonna take my house over here, and I'm gonna burn the rest of it down, right? These figures become soldiers, right? All the time, right? These aliens, right? These servants, these docile members of our society take up arms and they decide that they're going to lay waste to the systems that oppress them. That's what I see when I look at those figures now. It's what I start to see in the world around me. And so here's we sort of arrived at the end, and also another red summer. This one not so distant, 2020, right? Here in Minneapolis, right after the death of George Floyd, protesters burned down the 3rd Police Precinct. I kind of ended on this slide in part for thematic, I guess, wholeness, but also because it's springtime. And this idea that whenever we see movements and motions towards a more equitable world, right, there's always a red summer. And I think back to a song by Chance the Rapper, and I think he has the best words for me, at least ending this. And he says that I heard everyone's dying in the summer, so pray to God for a little bit more spring. Thank you all.
Thank you. It was incredible to see all the new work and then to hear you work through ideas that even you brought up in the last. It's like a continuation, and so congratulations on the work. Are there any questions or comments? I feel like people can unmute themselves. We're a small group today, so it'd be good to get conversational if we can.
I have a question. Peace, Jay. This is Corinne. I am a photographer based in Philly. I'm be honest with you, I was on mute, but I was snapping and clapping because the experiment that we call America, I struggle. I'm really struggling because I'm looking at a lot of us Black artists creating and pushing to the forefront the correctives of history, right? The things that are left out. And I think the thing that I'm wrestling with or am troubled by is, as you are putting together these assemblages and collages and pictures, how do you take care of yourself as an artist, as a Black artist, as a Black man, and dealing with some of the trauma? How do you take care of yourself? And yeah, what do you do in those difficult moments when you're faced with these truths? So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your words. Yeah, I definitely feel you. How do I take care of myself? Oh, probably badly. Probably just like you and everybody else. I mean, like, there's not a lot of room for stopping and breathing right now, you know? And I think, you know, it's just like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for that, to be honest with you. You know what's really weird? I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, because I feel like it's like a question that we ask. I ask of people too. I really don't have like the proper answer. I mean, like, I don't know, like chill out at home. I like put on some Netflix and like try to space out as best as I can. But it's hard. It's hard. I can't even watch Netflix no more. Like, man, I'll be looking at Netflix and it'd be too many white people and I just be like, man, I can't even chill now. Right. And so like, yeah, but I think that's fine though. I think we got to dwell there. I think it's uncomfortable. I think that it's painful. I think that it's a lot of things, but I think dwelling anywhere else is going to be complacency. So like for the moment right now, I'm okay. I'm not great by any means, but I'm still moving forward. And I think I'm okay dwelling here for a minute. And I think there's times where I just like disassociate, right? Like, I mean, like I'm phones off. I'm just like in the bed chilling, eating delivery. So, but I mean, those are like, God, I forget who said it. Someone told me once, they're like, there's no safe spaces. They're like, we think there's safe space, right? But it's like, is my house in a world of oppression a safe space? And it's like, nah, not really. So.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
I had a question that I had posted earlier in the chat. The concept of Black joy. Wanted to know if Jay wanted to talk about that. There's a quilt behind me. I make art quilts. I'm actually a lawyer, but I'm a hobbyist. I do quilts and they're on display at museums and things. And, you know, people always say, oh, you don't make happy quilts, or, you know, it's like, so, you know, and I've tried to read about Black joy and try to understand it as, yes, resilience and resistance. Yeah. But even that's not joyful for me. When I think of resistance, I think of picking up a gun. When I think of resilience, I think of other things that are not necessarily joyful, at least not in a Euro kind of way. So I'm just curious to see what you're thinking about that. I'm trying to work through some art on that, but I'm really having trouble.
I mean, I guess kind of how I sort of interject myself into it is I think there's a lot of artists making work about Black joy. And so for me, it's just like, I'm just not the one, you know, and I think that there's room to talk about Black joy. I think Black joy is real. I think we need that work. You know, like, just like, man, I just love like portraitures, like people who take portraitures, right? And they just show someone smiling, man, that like, cool, that we out here like enjoying life and loving it. And I support those artists, but I think my contributions aren't just to show Black joy. And also I kind of feel like I show so much pain and these other things that's like, for me, I keep my joy to myself. I keep that joy. That joy is like the thing that I withhold from the work, that maybe goes back to Corinne's answer or question, that's the thing that fuels me, is that I don't even show you the Black joy, right? I show you this, like, there's dark humor in there, right? But that Black boy joy, like they don't get it.
Thank you. I like that. You have to mine for the joy. Yeah. It's there, but it's yours, and no one can appropriate it. I like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add, I put this into the chat. Ironically, my husband, who is now deceased, represented Birdie Africa, Michael Moses Ward, and he was a friend of mine. He died a very young man, and I just wanted to comment. I know an awful lot about the MOVE bombing because Michael was the only child survivor of that horrific experience. And what can I say? I just thought you might find that interesting.
Hey, we're all here. Like I said, it's those moments, right? To bring us all together. The ones that we don't look for. We're all here.
Thank you for your talk. It was wonderful.
Thanks for coming.
Is there anybody else that has any question or comment? It's 8 o'clock, but yeah, I want to just make space for people. If anybody else has anything to add or share. I put in, oh, Corinne, you're gonna.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, how do we keep in touch with Jay? Because I'm always looking to support other Black photographers, other Black artists, and there are spaces where, outside of the white gaze, that are for us, by us, that I get a lot of my cup being filled back up. So I just would love to know how we can stay in touch with Jay.
I'll put my email.
Okay, cool. I'll just take a screenshot of it.
I'll
Thanks.
link to the organization that I run.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Cool. Awesome. Dope. Dope. Let me see. Sorry.
Okay. Jay, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for all you're doing right now. And I did put in the chat that Jay is going to be teaching a course called Unloading the Canon at PPAC starting March 26th. And I think that's going to be more an amazing experience. Thank you for doing that. And I appreciate you all for coming tonight.
I just dropped one plug real quick.
Yeah.
Just super. I just want to say that anyone who doesn't know, I run the Photo Green Book, and we're going to start our sort of regular stuff going on with some bringing in a lot of different artists. And that's going to start next week. So be on the lookout. If you don't follow us on Instagram, it'll be up on our website. And there's something else, but I forgot it, so it's too late.
Should I talk about the Edge of the Archive? There's going to be an outdoor exhibition featuring Jay at PPAC and the 3 other artists in residence. And it's going to be, it opens March 18th, but we have your emails and we'll keep you posted. You'll be able to see it outside safely. So we're excited about that as well.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me.